I'm standing here next to about a ton of limestone. It's a rather magnificent, slightly greater than life-size statue that was commissioned in 1954 by the British government from a sculptor called William Macmillan, and it was commissioned in order to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the first non-stop crossing of the Atlantic. It represents the two very brave men who made that flight in 1919, Sir John Alcock and Sir Arthur Whitten Brown. The statue originally stood at the Bath Road entrance to what in 1954 was called London Airport. Now, of course, it's Heathrow. The two brave men were prisoners of war in the First World War. Not together, but coincidentally they were. And at the end of the First World War, Sir John Alcock came back to Vickers to work as a test pilot. Almost immediately he was set up to be the pilot on the first attempt to cross the Atlantic. Arthur Whitten Brown was surprised to find that rather than getting the job that he thought he might have, was appointed as navigator for this flight. The two men were going to fly in a Vickers Vimy aircraft, designed by Rex Pearson, and in fact the one that they flew across the Atlantic was the first to be built here at Brooklands. They went in 1919 to Newfoundland to make the flight, and in June of that year they took off from Newfoundland, and after an extraordinary flight with bad weather, dodgy winds, almost stalling, almost crashing, nearly 16 hours later they arrived in a place called Clifton in County Galway in Southern Ireland. In doing so they beat another Brooklands team, that of Harry Hawker and Kenneth Mackenzie Grieve, who'd taken off somewhat earlier in a plane called the Sopwith Atlantic. This had been built by Tom Sopwith, tested here at Brooklands, but unlike the Vickers Vimy of Alcock and Brown, it only had a single Rolls-Royce Eagle engine. Unfortunately, that engine overheated not long after they took off from Newfoundland, and Hawker and Mackenzie Grieve ended up ditching in the Atlantic. Fortunately, they'd been picked up by a cargo boat, and they did eventually make it back to England, much to the relief of those who thought that they'd actually perished during the attempt. When Alcock and Brown got back to England, they were quite surprised to be feted rather as heroes. I don't think they were expecting that. There was a lot of celebrations, but at the end of that, John Alcock returned to being a test pilot with Vickers, but tragically, not very many months afterwards, he was killed in a crash involving a Vickers Viking amphibian, which ironically had also been designed by Rex Pearson, the designer of the Vimy. As for Arthur Whitten Brown, well, he never flew again. He got a desk job with the Metropolitan Vickers Engineering Company, and that was really the end of his flying career. As for the statue, it stayed at Heathrow. It moved around the site a bit, but in 2019 it was taken to Clifton in Ireland as part of the celebrations for the 100th anniversary of the transatlantic flight. And at the end of those celebrations, it was loaned to Brooklands Museum, and here it has been ever since.